The world is holding its breath ahead of what Donald Trump is calling Liberation Day, where he is planning to put a whole load of tariffs on trade from all around the world. And those import taxes could have a huge effect on the world economy. We have learnt one thing, though. He's definitely going to announce it at 4 p.m. US time on Wednesday. And his press secretary says the tariffs will come into effect the next day. So there is something for us to go on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and shortly we're going to be talking about the fact that loads of people are getting bills with quite big increases built into them in the UK. But first of all, we're going to zoom out to look at the world economy rather than just your domestic economy in your own home, because on Wednesday, Donald Trump is going to hold a big statement in the Rose Garden outside the White House, where he's going to levy a whole load of tariffs, import taxes on goods going from the rest of the world into the US, which could have an incredibly large impact on the world economy. This is going to be big. And this is one of those moments where we know something big is coming. So we're trying to just do some informed speculation about what that big thing could be, and actually just trying to see what actual facts and what details actually do exist, and also just look at some of the theories behind the Trump administration's actions, which could help us kind of prepare and understand what's going to happen on Wednesday, on the day that he's calling Liberation Day. So who better to call up than our woman in Washington, BBC senior news presenter, Caitríona Perry. Hello, Caitríona.
Hello, Adam. How are you?
Well, I just checked. It's actually chief presenter, isn't it? So I think I've just given you a new job title. Okay. But it sounded just as good.
Call me anything. It's fine.
And here is Chris Mason.
Hello.
Your job title goes without saying.
Hello.
Right. So we're recording this episode of Newscast on Tuesday, the 1st of April at about 6:30 p.m. UK time. But everyone is kind of mentally gearing up for tea time on Wednesday, the 2nd of April, Caitríona, for what Donald Trump is promising is going to be America's Liberation Day. What do we know about what his grand scheme might be?
Truthfully, very little at this point. We know it will be Liberation Day. From what we are being liberated, a little unclear, but there will be a very grand event at what will be 4 p.m. here, 9 p.m. in the UK tomorrow from the Rose Garden with the president. We're told his whole cabinet will be there as well, and some other invited guests. So, you know, Donald Trump knows how to put on a TV event, doesn't he? And this is going to be just that. Bells and whistles, razzmatazz, as I think it's safe to say almost every country in the world will be looking in with their fingers and toes crossed and through, half open eyelids, trying to see, oh my gosh, what is this going to mean for my country, for foreign direct investment, for the goods I export, for the goods I import, for global economies here in America, for the workers here who already are starting to feel the pinch from the tariffs that are already in place. But the tiny bit of information we do know came from the press secretary, Caroline Levitt, in her weekly briefing today, or daily briefing today. And she said that these will be announced tomorrow and they'll come into effect, she said, at one point in the press briefing immediately, and at another point in the press briefing, she said, on April 3rd. So either way, fairly fast impact here. We've seen President Trump in the past announce these things and then kind of put faraway dates on them. That doesn't seem to be the case this time.
And actually, that's interesting because I think a lot of countries were pinning their hopes on the fact that maybe they'd get a week, 2 weeks, a month's warning in which they could negotiate with Donald Trump to get their own individual tariffs down. But it seems like they're going for a big bang.
Yeah, and actually that's a really interesting point, because we have heard kind of on the grapevine that many world leaders have already been lifting the phone to President Trump over the last few weeks, days and hours. And the press secretary, Caroline, said today, he's still open to taking calls. He's still open to negotiating. That's how this president works. He likes doing deals and so on, which very much sounded like, hey, call up and tell him what you can offer from your country and you might get some kind of derogation tomorrow. But it seems to be that he's going to announce something that will be fairly universal, at least tomorrow, even if these side deals are kind of going on, and that perhaps in the days afterwards that'll be announced.
So the kind of the smart money in Washington is on universal tariffs, kind of the same rate for every country initially, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say fool's smart money in a way, because literally nobody knows here. I mean, there's, reporting that will come from a few media outlets that's well sourced and is saying kind of 20%. And then a few minutes later, it's saying 25%. And then a few minutes later, something is saying there will be derogations, there won't be. So it seems that this has been in flux up until at least last night. President Trump saying himself last night that he had locked in his plan. Press secretary repeating that today, but said he is spending all of today with his trade and tariffs team, as she put it, to perfect that plan. But it would seem that at least there will be some element of universality, even if that's kind of rowed back after that based on what offers are made.
And Chris, when I was walking into the studio, I was getting ready to say to you, oh, well, Keir Starmer's strategy has failed because he was pinning his hopes on a US-UK economic agreement that maybe potentially could have ameliorated some of these tariffs. He has not got that. He's sort of acknowledged up till now that he's not got that. But then from listening to Caitríona there, actually, the situation seems a lot more fluid. But then equally, didn't he tell the cabinet on Tuesday morning there wasn't going to be a deal before tariff day?
Yeah. I think all of the above is basically true. And then to sort of double down on Caitríona's observation a couple of times just there, the noises I repeatedly hear from folk I speak to in government here, who will talk about all sorts of different things, and we can get onto that in a sec, but will keep sort of garnishing every paragraph with a kind of, when we say we really, really don't quite know how this is going to play out, we really mean it, and variations on that. And it reminds me a little bit, I think we might have touched on this on Newscast a little while back, but it reminds me a little bit of some points in the various Brexit negotiating processes where you can get hypothetical intelligent arguments about how a chain of events might play out, but it is exactly that. It's a sort of hypothetical intelligent argument. In other words, it's just guesswork, really. So the message still from the government here is that they want to be sort of cool-headed about what is coming. They expect that tariffs are coming, that, if you were measuring success by the UK in negotiating some sort of carve-out, opt-out, call it what you will, it doesn't look like that's going to happen in the immediate moment, but that they are not likely to respond in a kind of colourful, hot-headed, full of language and condemnation kind of way, but carry on talking. They don't see tomorrow as the sort of end of a process, but a sort of staging post in a process. And they're talking about this sort of wider deal that they're hoping to secure, and they think they are well on the way to securing. But then they also say, back to that point about not quite knowing exactly how things might pan out, that just because you might be having very good discussions in good faith with, to use a terminology that gets bandied around in these conversations, interlocutors on the other side of a negotiation, doesn't necessarily mean that when said plan lands on the president's desk, it survives contact with that moment. So back to that kind of who knows thing.
But Caitríona, a US trading partner, saying that tomorrow their first instinct will be to not make things worse, not initially retaliate, keep calm. That's quite different from some of the US's other trading partners. For example, the one that's to the north of you, Canada.
Yeah, we've heard more strong language, haven't we, from the new Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, just in the last few hours, kind of saying, President Trump's attempting to completely destruct the global economy, the American economy, our economy is linked to that, but I'm not going to let him do that. Really tough talk. I suppose Canada has the advantage of being a pretty large nation itself, which the same is not true of other nations. And I can speak for my own native Ireland, who everyone there is feeling incredibly nervous today because of how much foreign direct investment comes from American multinationals into Ireland, how many of the big companies are based there, particularly on the element of pharmaceutical companies, which President Trump has signalled out as something he feels very aggrieved about, that so much of the American pharmaceutical production is in Ireland. And, he said a line himself, the friend in many cases is worse than the foe. They've taken advantage of us. Not speaking about Ireland specifically there last night, but it just speaks to that nervousness and how people don't want to kind of upset the apple cart, if you like, until they know what's in the apple cart and what's falling out of it.
That's such a good way of putting it. Don't upset the apple cart until we know what's in it. Because that gets to the crux of it, doesn't it, really? Obviously, you can decide that you're going to get upset by the apple cart because you're pretty sure what's going to be in it. Or you have a hunch at what might be the worst things at the bottom of the apple cart. But yeah, the psychology of international diplomacy / posturing / politicking in anticipation of a kind of global moment like this 24 hours ahead is quite something to watch, isn't it?
And Chris, do we know what tools the government might be considering, even if at the moment they're saying we're not going to tell you and we're not going to be doing anything dramatic initially?
Well, they kind of simultaneously are saying that they are willing to use every tool, but they're not particularly keen on sort of waving tools around in public. I've probably stretched the apple cart imagery to breaking point, and now the toolbox imagery is being shaken too. They fall back on, but then you would if you were them, wouldn't you? The trading relationship in goods between the United States and the UK, and point out, to use their language, that it's pretty balanced, that there isn't a vast deficit that Donald Trump is staring at as far as the trading goods between the US and the UK. In other words, so goes the British argument, there isn't a problem you need to solve here, Mr. President, fingers crossed, toes crossed, etc., etc. What might they be able to do with the digital services, digital sales tax around all of that? Is there something they can do that tweaks things that might be something that Washington quite likes? As I say, I think all of this has a time frame on it beyond tomorrow. What else can they talk around about the tech deal that was floated and that the president spoke very warmly of when the Prime Minister and the President had their talks in Washington a few weeks back now? So there's all sorts of things around that are floating, whilst at the same time an acknowledgement at this end that the president is clearly keen on a sort of moment of global theatre, if you like, and so that sense that you might get to the subtleties and the nuances and the carve-outs on this and that potentially for some people around the world over the coming days and weeks, but that would come after the kind of moment of fireworks rather than before. And I suppose it goes back to that sense, and I hear this reflected at this end, that the Trumpian style is one of making the deal and negotiating and all the rest of it, and you start that by shocking and surprising and adopting a position from which you might then move a little distance from in time, rather than doing it the other way around.
But Caitríona, that idea that tariffs are a tool you use as a negotiation to maybe get something else, that's only one school of thought within the Trump administration. There are other people who have even kind of like bigger plans for reorganizing the entire world economy and using tariffs to do that. So a much kind of bigger thing than just using it as a way to squeeze individual countries.
That's it. I mean, President Trump has always spoken about wanting to do deals and negotiate and have a kind of leader-to-leader level discussion. And he's leading on this sort of notion of transactional diplomacy. But within this trade and tariffs team that he has around him are people who have very different viewpoints of just what is kind of set about to happen here. So you have Howard Lutnick in there, who is the Commerce Secretary, who, came from Cantor Fitzgerald, lifelong business person, billionaire, feels very firmly about tariffs and about kind of reordering the economic structure. And speaking to people within the administration, they're kind of saying, Howard Lutnick has sort of put his neck out a bit on this plan, and the president is really listening to him and values his opinion. And, we know the president puts a lot of value on successful people and wealthy people who've, made it and listens to their viewpoints. But, if this backfires in a dramatic way, which there is great potential for, that perhaps we may see some heads starting to roll as this process moves on. I mean, we've been speaking about the nervousness in foreign governments. I can tell you the nervousness in this country as well about the potential knock-on of whatever this liberation movement will be tomorrow is really huge. You know, I've been talking to people in the kind of middle part of America, where manufacturing is one of the major employers, where they are exposed to the impact of tariffs because goods travel back and forward a few times. I mean, obviously a lot of focus has been on the auto industry. They're really nervous. You know, they see prices going up for themselves in the grocery store, so their wages will go not as far as they have been going, but also that they could be out of a job because it just becomes too expensive to actually manufacture things in this country, and there won't be a market there to buy those cars or whatever, which is exactly the opposite of what President Trump says he's setting out to do here. You know, we heard him repeat it yesterday. We heard the press secretary repeat it today. If you manufacture in America, you will not be exposed to tariffs. And that's the best thing of all that you can offer President Trump. But that viewpoint isn't shared amongst the people who arguably are on the front line of the impact of all of this.
Caitríona, thank you so much.
You are welcome. We shall see how our Liberation Day goes tomorrow and talk again.
Filling the airtime until something massive comes that we know is coming.
We've never done that before.
Right, see you later.
Ta-ra.
Bye.
On the 1st of April, there's loads of terrible April Fool's jokes on social media, but there's also lots of bills landing on people's doormats with big price increases in them, because this is the day, this is the week when things tend to go up in price. And this is just a few days before the increase in employer national insurance contributions, which is also a big thing in the British economy right now. So let's round up what's going on with friend of the podcast. She's the consumer editor at the Financial Times, Claer Barrett, and she's here. Hello, Claer.
Lovely to see you again, Adam.
Is it a lovely time, though, because lots of people are going to get lots of big bills arriving. Do you want to just run through the things that we think are going up kind of today, this week, this month?
Sure. Well, I mean, people are calling it awful April. I mean, I have to say, every April, things do tend to go up. So let's put it into context. But yes, it's pretty miserable. Energy bills, because the energy price cap has just gone up 6%. So if you're the 2/3 of people in Britain whose tariff is linked to the price cap, then if you do nothing, your energy bills are going to go up by 6%. Water is the real hidden horror this year. All of the water companies agree like a 5-year plan in which to charge us, and some of the water companies have been able to put bills up year on year by like 47%, nearly 50% in some cases, because they're front loading the amount that the regulator is saying that they can legitimately charge us to fix all of the leaks.
Because a lot of that is for investment, isn't it, in the water infrastructure?
It is, but I have to say I was not expecting my own water bill to go up by quite that much, but I've got some tips later on in the show. Then we have other taxes that are rising, things like stamp duty for people who are moving home. That's gone up on the 1st of April.
Oh, yeah, let's just explain the stamp duty changes, because there's two different types of stamp duty. So first-time buyers and then everyone else. Yeah,
so these are reliefs that the last government granted so that first-time buyers especially paid less stamp duty, and those reliefs have now lapsed. So first-time buyers still get some money off, but not as much. So they could have lost out by as much as £6,000 if they transacted tomorrow as opposed to yesterday, depending on the value of the house that they're buying. But yes, all kinds of other things are rising. Mid-contract price rises on things like broadband and mobile deals. They're still allowed to put those through, but they've got to tell you what they cost in pounds and pence. And then all kinds of other annoyances, £5 extra on vehicle excise duty, car tax, lots of should I mention? I should mention the fact that the licence fee has also gone up by a few pounds. Very good value, I would say, that it is sitting within Broadcasting House as I am. Some other things are going up too in April, the state pension being one because of the triple lock, and also the national minimum wage, which around 3 million workers are paid on. Some really big increases as well for people who are at the younger end of the age spectrum. But with all of the bills that are going up, of course, even getting that little bit of money if you are on a very low income is not going to make much difference.
What's so interesting about this is it's an illustration yet again of why the headline rate of inflation is only a fraction of the story, because there's a different reason for most of those bills going up, whether it's the wholesale price of energy or whether it's negotiations between the water regulator and the water companies. There's different things going on in each place.
There are, and there are also different things that you could do potentially to cut your bills. So if you, for example, can get a water meter fitted in your property, that is probably one of the best ways that you can save money, especially if you've got more bedrooms in your house than people. You're practically guaranteed to save. But not everyone can get a water meter. If you live in a block of flats, for example, like we do, you can't get one, and they have to estimate your use. And that's why my bill has gone up by so much. But a lot of people don't know that if you can't get a water meter fitted and you live on your own, virtually all the water companies offer a single person discount. Now, every time I mention this,
I did not know that.
People are like, what? And I get loads of messages from people saying, I've applied for this, and what's more, I've got it. Now, Thames Water, they won't apply it to single parent families. Single parents are, Citizens Advice have said this morning, among the hardest hit people. You've just got one income, you've got all of these things going up, nobody to split the cost with. But that is one way you can save. Another way that you could save is looking at your energy bill. Now, there's lots of energy deals on the market at the moment that are around 11, 12, 13% lower than the level of April's price cap. Now, some of them involve a bit of gerrymandering with things like cash back and so on and so forth to get to that level. But nevertheless, there are other deals that you could look at. Most suppliers do a tariff that's like a variable tariff, doesn't cost anything to switch to it, and it's a couple of percentage points below the price cap, and it tracks it. So that's something to do. If you do nothing else, do submit a meter reading, because I know that I've used more power in the last couple of months because it's been really cold. So I've had the heating on because I'm a big softie. I want to make sure that I'm billed accurately, so I'm paying for all of those units, those extra units that I've used over the winter, at the lower rate and not the higher rate that's come in from the 1st of April.
Such good advice.
Well, I try.
In terms of the mid-contract price hikes for your mobile phone and your broadband, there's actually nothing you can do about that, is there? Because that's built into the contract that you sign when you change your tariff.
Well, yes and no. So I was able to negotiate with my broadband supplier because I didn't realise that I was paying for a sports channel. I think I got it as a sop
Even you
to the husband
right
a while ago, and actually he doesn't watch it. So I said, okay. So I mean, it's worth a try to see if you can get your package changed or slimmed down. Social tariffs, they're well worth mentioning. Again, if you're on universal credit or any kind of means-tested benefit, you have to ask your provider to put you on the social tariff, and they may say, oh, the bandwidth might not be as good, but, try it. And you don't have to pay an exit fee if you move on to that. Another thing that you can do with mobile phones in particular, there's millions of people who are out of contract and they're still paying an inflated monthly price because when you first get your contract, it includes paying for the handset over 18, 24 months. So you can just send a simple text with the word info to 85075.
Hang on, I'm going to do it now. Hang on. I interrupted while you were saying the number. Right, say it again.
So you can send a simple text saying the word info, I-N-F-O, to this number, 85075.
85075.
And you should get a text back saying whether you're still in contract or not. And if you are, how much it would cost to leave early. Obviously, if you're out of contract, you could switch to a SIM-only deal, and that could save you maybe £20, £30 a month, so a couple of £100 over the course of a year.
Right, I've just done it. And I thought, I know the answer to this because I'm desperate for my mobile phone contract to come to an end because it's so expensive. And that's going to be my liberation day, just to quote Donald Trump.
Oh, very good.
It says, hello, we're sorry to hear you're thinking of leaving. If you leave today, your termination fee will be £0.
Okay, so that sounds
so
like
actually, it sounds like I am out of contract.
It sounds like you are.
Which means the diary note I've put to myself when I'm out of contract, which I think is in May, is wrong.
Well, it's a quick way of knowing whether it's worth doing some further investigation. But Adam, I think that we're all just going to have to become more on it with these things. What are we being charged for? Streaming services are another one. They're normally in addition to whatever package we're paying for. Now the weather's getting a bit nicer. I've put a couple of mine on pause because they're making it easier now for people to pause rather than cancel. Yes. And that is a good innovation.
And on that, it's interesting that the difficult to cancel or pause ones now stand out because so many others have made it easy.
Yeah, but it's just keeping an eye on all of these things and thinking, how can I get the bills down? But also the other thing I worry about is that there's such a level of embedded rises in all of these bills going up at the same time. Are we going to see displacement activity in the economy? If we're spending more and more on our bills, and that citizens' advice research that came out this morning was showing that people on lower incomes are spending, really horrific proportions of their income just on the basics of the bills. Like, what are we not going to be spending money on? Is this going to make life tougher for small businesses, for coffee shops, for restaurants, for pubs? Because if we've got less money in our pocket, we're going to cut the level of disposable spending. The other thing that worries me is how much people are borrowing to pay the bills. Now, again, lots of the debt charities have done research into people, paying a bill on a credit card. You're going to be having interest payments then on top of your debt, and you've still got to pay it off. The same goes for overdrafts. I think that's a really hidden problem in Britain. And another thing that really gets my goat is the level of effort that you have to put in to find out if you can qualify for a discount. Now, the water companies are a case in point here. They all offer schemes to help people who are on low incomes, but they're all different. So the level of research that you've got to do to find out if you qualify, and then the Thames Water one, because I've been trying to help some of my neighbours apply for it, it's like a maths exam.
Right.
You can qualify for help if 5% of your net income is what you spend on your bill. And they do have online calculators to help people work this out. But my fear is that a lot of people who should be getting help, 1 in 10 water companies, according to Ofwat, the water regulator, how many of them will be put off by this kind of mathematical barrier to actually getting what they're entitled to?
And I suspected you were going to say that. So in advance, we got in touch with Thames Water just to hear their take on that. And this is what they said.
Oh, good.
They say customers are asked to provide their income, any outstanding debts and regular outgoings so we can assess the best help for them. This approach is endorsed by Ofwat and the Consumer Council for Water as best practice. We offer more support than any other water provider, and 1 in 10 households will benefit from our support over the next 5 years. And they say that people can fill in that maths exam, as you described it, at their own pace, which is more about the time it takes to fill it in rather than the difficulty of filling it in. But anyway, that's what Thames Water say.
Well, I would say anyone listening, do apply for it. Don't be put off by what I've said, please. But I think that they should make it easier for customers, and there should be a unified scheme that all of the water companies use rather than these piecemeal different rules for different folks.
Now, I've got 2 editorial dilemmas to chew over with you. The first one, are we potentially making too much fuss about this? And I don't mean to downplay the cost of living pressures that people are facing. That feels very real when you get a big bill and you don't like it. But if you look at, wage growth over the last year, and you mentioned the increase in the national living wage, that is higher than quite a lot of these bill increases. So actually, is there a danger that we focus on the big bill rather than the similarly large increases in people's wages, people's incomes?
Yeah, I mean, obviously all of these things are averages with wages. What I worry about with wages going forwards is, okay, people who are on the lowest incomes, they've got that guaranteed uplift. Employers are having to pay more. But employers are also having to pay more national insurance contributions for all of us.
From Saturday onwards.
From Saturday onwards. And this has put big pressures on firms in terms of what their overall staff budget is. So if you're somebody who's on the up and is trying to get a pay rise, trying to get a promotion, obviously it's different within the public sector because they have pay bands. Within the private sector, it's just a free-for-all. So is it going to be harder for you to negotiate your next rise than it otherwise would have been? Well, I think probably. Now, all of those employment statistics about wages, they're all retrospective, they're backward-looking. So it will be a while before we see this reflected in. A couple of economists that I spoke to about this last week, the message is very clear. Changing jobs is the easiest way to getting a rise. So some food for thought there.
And also, I just went back to our old friends, the Office of Budget Responsibility, and their blue book from last week, from the spring statement. And so their measure, and which is the government's preferred measure for their growth target, for us all feeling growth, is increases in real household disposable income. And okay, that measure is going to increase a little bit this year and next year. But then it's kind of flat for a year or 2 years in the middle of this parliament. So actually, people will not feel that they're getting any richer on average. So actually, I wonder if in April 2028, when we're talking about the bill increases, actually it'll feel even worse then.
But then there are other really subjective things like, is your contract to rent your flat coming to an end. Really, really big increases in rents, especially in London and the South East. Is your mortgage deal coming up for renewal? We've got this hangover of people who refinanced, on really low rates, who are coming to the end of a fix and having to really readjust their budgets for these much bigger sums. So there's lots of different pinch points around the economy. It's not just people on low incomes. People on high incomes are also having to really scrutinise their spending line by line. But I think overall good that we're talking about it, because there's always something that you can do to try and get the bills down. But it used to be kind of optional.
Yes.
People like me who are slightly weird and obsessed would look at it, but now it's not optional. Everyone's got to be on it.
It's necessary for everyone. And my second editorial dilemma, and I know what you'll say to this, or maybe I don't know what you'll say to this actually, is the idea of cash back with your debit card and your credit card, because I'm amazed at actually the number of things I've not noticed I could get cash back on if I used a certain card to like buy a train ticket or shop in a certain supermarket. But I do wonder if that's falling into the trap we discussed before of spending to save.
I was going to say.
And it's like, is that to just encourage you to spend some money you didn't actually want to spend, but just using the discount as a little bit of seasoning to get you in there?
Well, my bank has put cash back on my transactions. I didn't ask for it. And, it does tick up. I mean, I ignore it because I don't want to be thinking, I'll spend £100 on this and I'll get
£1 back.
Cash back. But, you can really go down the rabbit hole on these cashback deals. What they want you to do is to look at the website and look at their affiliated links with retailers and tempt you into spending more. And again, if it's something that you really need, maybe a piece of tech or a one-off purchase or a holiday, because it can be on services as well, the cashback. Especially around Christmas and Black Friday time, you can see some really attractive deals. But you said it, you've got to watch the spending to save. Points don't necessarily mean prizes; they can just mean bigger credit card bills.
Yes, Claire, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.